Please come up. Sit wherever you want. So thanks for sharing your films. You all look delighted to be doing this. I promise it'll be fine. So just to introduce who we have here, we have on the end Carmen Hannibal, who's a PhD candidate at the RCA. Next to Carmen is Anna Bunting-Branch, who made the film The Linguists. Then we have Réka Bucsi, who made the film Love. And then we have Renee Zhan, who made the last film we just saw, Oh Black Hole. So just to start with, I'm coming back to the quote that I used when it's sort of subtitled to this program that's on the website and on your handouts, which is a Leonora Carrington quote, which is, "I've always had access to other worlds. We all do because we dream." So I'd really like to just hear from all of you, and then maybe Carmen, sort of an overall kind of feeling, but maybe in turn if you could talk a bit about the world building that goes on in your films. And maybe, Réka, if we could start with you. Because I was interested when I read your director's statement, and not that you used the word goddess, but this sort of put yourself as a kind of goddess position of creating this solar system and creating the rules of this world. Could you just sort of talk a bit about your intentions?
Okay, so this film is from 2015, so I have to go back into that time in my head. So I usually start with details. So that in this case as well, I was starting with small scenes, like thinking about words in poetry or something. Like I was thinking about haikus in terms of just having small details or characters or ideas that somehow come together, but they are not necessarily linked together in the beginning. And then, actually, I have to say that the process of applying for funding makes things more coherent, because you kind of have to put it into a storyboard and make it more pitchable for people. So I think that came, in this case, the building the world and building the rules for this world, how gravity works, or how, kind of like a scientific way of approaching world building, came when I was doing the storyboard and character design and like the pre-production part.
Was it always going to be about love, sort of the broader theme of love?
So the basic was that I wanted to make a film about love, but I didn't want to make like a love story of certain people or characters. I wanted to make like a general film that would feel tactile, and the things that you see in the movie would you want to touch or smell or something. And I wanted to have an emotion come across, and not necessarily a story about love.
And you succeeded.
I hope so.
Renee, do you want to pick up on the same question?
Yeah, I guess talking a bit about the world building aspect, I think that's something that is one of the most exciting parts of animation for me. And when we were sort of thinking of the original story, I think it always... So the original image was, I was drawing this woman with a dark sort of smear where her head should be, and I was drawing the image a lot, and I was sort of thinking about what that meant to me and why I was drawing it. And I think an answer that came was that she turned into a black hole somehow, and through the process of not wanting time to happen, so she kind of sucks everything and everyone she loves, everything in the universe inside of her. And creating the inside of a black hole was a very sort of appealing idea, because we don't really know what's inside, so it kind of gave us a lot of freedom. And especially working in stop motion, sort of imagining like a solidified black hole where time had stopped, and the entire universe was frozen in there, and how that would, after 1,000 years, like how that would all, everything would deform and twist and turn into these, I don't know, blobby creatures. That was kind of a big part of the fun of the film, for for me and for a production designer, Richard Henley. Yeah.
And did you, from the start, sort of imagine? So we've got the external world is 2D, the internal world is 3D. Was that always sort of something you had in mind?
Yeah, I think that sort of went along with the idea that everything outside the black hole is ephemeral and fleeting and impermanent. And then as time stops, or even as the black hole starts to, after she's sucked everything in herself, she turns, the 2D technique changes from just sort of straight ahead to this like draw erase animation, so you can sort of start to see the traces of the image, and then it got kind of oilier and thicker, the paint, and then as we went inside her, it like turned into fully 3D.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you, Anna. So tell us about the linguists and the shadowy figures in that world.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking, when I think about world building, I think about science fiction. That's a big inspiration for my work. And especially this relationship, which I thought was really interesting, seeing the films and seeing the credits. And you mentioned about funding and kind of the groups of people that are making the films. For me, this idea of world building is also really about this tension between a kind of individual vision and a kind of collective vision. And that's something that I think is really interesting about science fiction. Books, especially, there's kind of worlds that are created, but often the process of writing is very hermetic, and for me the process of animating also is like that too. For me, I'm really interested in these attempts to kind of build worlds and communities, and this is something that Suzette Hayden-Elgin was really interested in her work, which is science fiction, but also creating a constructed language, Ladan, which is what's being spoken in the animation. I think of that animation as a kind of fan fiction, a kind of, conjuring, and you mentioned about kind of channeling the spirit of Leonora Carrington, and that's really what I was thinking about with this animation, this idea of kind of what it means to, channel the spirit of what Elgin was doing with her experiments.
What time is your film set in? The wallpaper,
Yeah,
the statue, it's like clues.
It's a kind of, it's a sort of constructed time. I was thinking about Gothic, that was kind of my vibes, so it was like Gothic is kind of 80s, but also maybe a bit 1880s.
So, I'm sure for some of the people in the room, the computer screen is probably quite a novelty, but for some of us, not so much.
So it was meant to be the kind of suspended, past future amalgamation, really. Retro futures. That's what someone called it.
It's a good word. Yeah. Carmen, do you have any thoughts following on from this?
It was a real pleasure to watch all the films. I would say, to start with, it's really hard to imagine anything beyond these incredible worlds. I think just going back to reality seems really dull now. I think definitely there's this idea of the worlds that come out are really strong, and I think through my more looking through the literature and thinking about how this is contextualized, obviously Freud is like an obvious source, but I think what's important is this symbolic order that these worlds come through. So where you actually build the worlds and you make and create and animate these worlds, as a viewer, I think of these worlds as symbolically.
And especially Amandine Meyer's film, the one with the story of two trumpets, the one that's the watercolor one. That's very much her story about being a female creator in the sense of artist and mother. So I think that's quite an interesting. I think creators, not necessarily all mothers, but that everyone is, is bringing to life these worlds for sure. I think coming back about language, so it was interesting. I was thinking when I look back on this film, when I put the program together, and then I realised how limited actually there's not that much language except for a few words in your film, or obviously yours is operatic, and then we have this, this kind of this language of women, and so I was sort of interested in this idea as well that maybe with not using language, that maybe there's something about, you know, using symbolism as a way, a bit like the having another language is, God, this is convoluted. I'm trying to get to the point here. You're using symbolism in a way to say, I don't need your words. This is, you know, I'm putting this on screen. These are my images. Did I have a question? Is this just a point? Yeah, so am I being too simplistic? Maybe that's my question. Is it just, you know, this is a feminine desire to move away from the construction of patriarchal society? I'm just going to say that word. Right, putting it out there to you. If you want to.
Yeah, I think I tried to, I crammed a lot of words in through the medium of song. We were trying to tell the story through the songs, to kind of give plot points through song, but we realized that for most viewers and listeners, that song opera isn't a language. It's something that you experience and listen to. So that was something that we really sort of were trying to navigate throughout, was that we were trying to tell the story through the songs. And so yeah, I think that was an interesting sort of thing for us to discover. But we worked with this amazing opera singer called Lori Luxemburg. She's an experimental opera singer, and I think she kind of forms her own language of emotion, like when the black hole singing and expressing her grief that time is moving again. It kind of, I think those for me are the most moving, like emotionally effective parts of the film. When there are no words, but when she's just singing and wailing and making these amazing noises that she can make. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's almost like the emotion of the voice is more important than the words, for sure. Was there ever a point where you were like, or did you started with the words and then was there ever a point where you were like, maybe we don't need the words, maybe, you know, because the visuals are very strong.
I think I was just thinking while watching it. I'm kind of in a similar. It was a few years ago that we made it. So kind of thinking, immersing back into it is an interesting experience. And sitting with our editor Ami Arpin is in the audience, and I was going to talk to her after this about how we should add some narration in. Maybe some more words might do it.
Anyone else about symbolism and language?
I don't really use dialogue or narration in any of my films, and I feel like I did, but that was more like a commercial thing, or comedy and commercial. And for me, these characters, they don't really need to speak. I feel like they would be, I don't want to know them too much, if that makes sense. I like to treat the characters I work with like they would be actors and they would improvise, even though it's like animation is nothing like that. You have to plan every single little thing in movement. But I like the feeling of the characters that maybe hopefully the audience looks at them and they know that they are going to make something or do something, but you don't know where they are going, and it's kind of like a little bit like a documentary, like a nature in this case, I was thinking about nature documentaries too. And yeah, I kind of stray away from talking. And in terms of symbolism, I remember I wanted to really stay away from showing something that symbolizes something else, because I kind of feel like that everything that you put on screen in a film is going to turn into something else. Like I was imagining that what if you would hear, on the news, like in this film, that there is a planet that is entirely inhabited by horses. It would just be like a fact, like ooh, that's interesting, but like it wouldn't stand for something else. Like a horse stands for so many things in movies or in art, and I wanted to stay away from that, to add even more to that. I wanted to just show them that they are there, but because the symbolism part kind of happens naturally in film, I think.
I'd actually forgotten there was dialogue, and I've forgotten about the...
Yeah, but also the film is called Love, and so I feel like that word is not even a real word. I think that everyone can read that word, even though maybe someone can't read, they can read this word, because it's basically shapes. It's so well known. It's not really a word. So that sentence, those are so minimalistic and so kind of dumb that I just don't consider it to be dialogue.
Fair enough. Anna, the one with the special language.
Yeah, so I was thinking it's interesting about you saying the kind of like limits of language, I suppose, because this is really what Suzette Haydn Elgin was really inspired by and was working through with Lardin. I think I've got the same ringtones. I think maybe it's mine and I'm not going to be able to answer it. Yeah, she started when she was creating Lardin.
Sorry.
No, not at all. Is it?
Should have been on.
Oh, it's fine. Lardin is a language that kind of takes flight from the limit of dominant language. So the thinking behind Lardin is that how do we move and inhabit the lexical gaps in languages that already exist, and what new languages might we need to express perceptions that are not communicated or given kind of voice in the languages that we speak. So Elgin set up workshops that she ran. She developed the language herself, and then she...
I think she's trying to get through to you.
Yeah, she is.
Sorry. Yesterday, I tried to turn it off, and it rang right at the beginning of the screen. Sorry, it's off now.
I can't remember what I was saying. Oh yeah, so anyway, sorry. She developed the language and then she put it out into the world through workshops at fan conventions, science fiction fan conventions. It started and then it kind of developed from there, and she made tapes. So at the beginning it's her speaking the language, and it's from a tape that's in an archive in Oregon. It's the kind of first like digitization of one of the tapes that she used to send out to these networks. But the beginning exercise that she did with people was this very simple prompt: there ought to be a word. And you were describing not what the word would be, but what the word would mean. So you're like describing the absence in language that you want to kind of create a word to hold in a way. So I was thinking about with love, it's like it's such a kind of baggy and also very unsatisfying word for all the different types of love that exists. And there are some very interesting love-related Lardin words, which are to do with a lot of the words kind of embed a negative, so like non-love, or thinking about sort of love for different types of people, or love that creates different kinds of effects. So I think there's something really interesting also about, for me, animation as a form which is just creating these worlds. It's not enough to kind of capture worlds that exist, but it's really thinking about sort of, there ought to be a world in a way, and that's kind of what the animation creates for me.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting as well, the choice of words that you put on screen. I mean, I imagine she might probably count thousands of words, but your glossary, it was very, it's very sort of much tactile and creativity, and I like the fact you talked about the absence of women in history and that kind of thing. So obviously that's your kind of editing of it, but how big does anyone speak this language? Are you the only person that knows about it now?
No, I'm very much not the only. I thought I was, but I'm not. There's there's not a huge community, but there is a really interesting community that are still creating. There's a creator who makes videos for YouTube. There are live kind of wikis where you can teach yourself Lardin, and a lot of the original material that Elgin had as kind of newsletters and things are now online. And there's a dictionary and grammar of Lardin, which is now in its third edition. The third one was published 2019, I think. And that gathers up a lot of the words that Elgin created, but also that the network, the Lardin community kind of created, because it was kind of thrown open. She set the rules, if you like. She was a linguist and a science fiction writer and fan. So yeah, she kind of set the rules and then put it into the world. Yeah.
Very
And
cool.
anyone can add to it as well, so everyone should get involved.
I'm not taking up that challenge. As someone who can barely speak English. Carmen, anything to add?
Yeah, I think the whole discussion about the language and its connection to not just images, sight, but also all of our other senses is really interesting and very intricate. And I think the conversation is much more productive and interesting when images and language are somehow combined at the threshold of language. Is a very catchy phrase, because I think that the way I perceive it is that when it comes down to it, it's about it's a way of communicating meaning. It's a way to kind of like perceive and then communicate that experience. And I think that language and images somehow very, very much work together to create like a full experience of the world. So it's much more interesting to see how they kind of like not fight each other, but support each other. And I think in animation it becomes really very complicated very quickly, because you have all kinds of systems and movement and sound and color and texture. You know, you got all the senses going on. And I think the whole thinking also about the discussion has been, like the limits of language. I think it's been there, and especially with the psychoanalysis, it's symbolism. Then Lacan came and said, oh, it's the unconscious structures language. So this idea that images and objects and symbols and language, that they kind of like are dependent on each other to fully communicate what comes within us in our social relations. I think that's what we see in the films. It's not just my personal view, or it's like not this complete objective point of view of the world, and even it's scientific portraying cosmic tales. It's that combination of the of what we can share, but also what we feel personally. So I think that's it's a big debate about the connection between language and images, but they definitely come alive in the animations, and I would say in very intricate ways.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, you just said scientific, and I hadn't actually really thought about these three films working together, but actually you're all kind of dealing with science in a way. Could you just explain about singularity? Put you on the spot.
I don't. My very basic understanding of black holes comes from sort of Google, articles, 10 interesting facts about black holes, and one of them is that at the middle of a black hole, or at the kind of that part of a black hole, there's a singularity. A singularity is like it's where the limit kind of reaches something. It's like an extreme point of, I don't know, I'm sure somebody could say better than I could. I don't want to be. But yeah.
Anyway, the singularity saves the day, and that's all that really matters in this case, yes. I'm going to open it up to audience questions now. Anyone? Have we got a microphone?
Hello? Yeah, okay. My question is for everyone, but for Anna, because it's to do with, Lardan, right? So we have Lardan, right? But I guess it goes out to everyone, because I've noticed that, the entire scene, that the theme of this festival is pretty much to do with women and womanhood and kind of, the general experience womanhood. So when we connect it to language, do you think that the reason as to why we don't see something like Lardan and majority of other short films, or a majority of other films in general, or animation, is because women choose to use their emotions or music or body language to kind of portray what they're feeling? And do you think that's connected to the fact that we don't feel like language that we do have actually expresses our emotions in a correct way, and that's why we create something like Lardan?
Yeah, I can answer it kind of specifically in terms of that, and then I think it's a really good question actually to think about the whole panel as well. So in terms of Lardan, something that really interested me about it is that it was set as an experiment for 10 years. So it starts in 1982, it's developed, and then it's launched in 1984. And Elgin sets a 10-year kind of limit for this experiment, and she sets it up as a very specific thought experiment with these criteria for, these hypotheses basically for how she hopes it will be taken up within feminist discourse by women, but she never limited the network only to women, but the idea was that it was centering women's perception as a perception that hasn't structured dominant language, was kind of how she put it. But by the end of the experiment, after 10 years, her conclusion is that it's a failure, because she's like, no one speaks Lardan, no one's interested in Lardan, people are already forgetting about it, and I've only just finished it. And so she writes very interestingly in reflection that for her it's a failure, and she thinks about why is that. And one of her conclusions is women are working in really interesting ways within dominant language, and actually that these kind of reworkings of it, or using it, kind of working within the system against the system, is working within feminism. So, and she also then goes on to say she starts to wonder whether it's true that men and women actually exist. And this is something is a whole other conversation, which I think is super interesting. So for me, this idea, the reason I'm really interested in Lardan is because it's kind of considered a failure, and I think about what does it mean for something to fail, and how can we move through those failures. So this is why this idea of like a seance and a kind of death and, like from speaking from the other side of something is really important for me in that animation. So I think that's really, relevant to your question, but then I think it's really interesting more widely in terms of how you program.
Does anyone else want to answer that question before I say anything specifically about your films? You don't have to.
For me, it's not. So I make films because I feel like I can express myself through image, and film a lot is about image and not words and not dialogue. Really, for me, it's not about. It's like a visual language, but it's not actual. It's not written. The written word is. I feel like movies are, especially short films, are almost a genre in themselves, because you can try so many things and something can, I don't think that no language in like a feature-length movie would work or keep an audience reactive, but I think that films are so manipulative, like in a positive way. I feel like they can manipulate people to feel a certain way. I'm not saying I don't like to watch films with dialogue, but for me personally, I don't miss having it.
Yeah, I think, I guess just to answer the question by talking a bit about, I don't know, I mean, I think I get a lot of questions about the female characters in my films. I've mostly had female characters, and I get a lot about the female characters is that character you? And then I made a film where every character was me, but that in response to that question. And then with this film, we got a lot of questions about, what is the relationship between Singularity and the black hole? Are they, is she her daughter? That was a big question. That was, is it the same woman? Is it like, are they sort of opposite forces? And I don't know. I think it's kind of interesting. There's questions that come up because they're two female characters.
Do you just change it every time they answer?
I think I might not entirely be sure myself, which is not a great answer.
They can be whatever you want them to be. That's what the symbolism of this is about. I think there is a lot. I think without dialogue, with the emotions of these films. I mean, I put in Kitty Fanegold's "Hell Hath No Fury" because it's just such a kitsch, hyper-violent film to kind of really contrast with some of the kind of softer films. And then, you know, we were talking about this earlier about Réka Bucsi's Snow Hut, you know, and all of her films have this soft violence. It's all like really beautiful, and then you're watching it and you're just like really like grossed out by what you're seeing, and you're not entirely sure what you're seeing. Though she does brilliantly say in her, you might have read in the synopsis, she kind of goes, "This is my memories of my hometown. It's all simple and universal. You don't need to really question it," which is just the best kind of diversive kind of answer to say, I'm not really answering your question about what this film's about. I don't know if I answered your question there, but... Carmen, did you want to say anything?
Well, I think that without getting into trouble, I think the question about, you know, the dichotomy between women and emotion and men and logic, it's a bit tricky because there are many, like, there are many cases in reality where that's not true. I think a lot of the greatest poets were at least canonized, put into the canon, were male. And so I don't necessarily think that where the real images or even the linguistic images are necessarily just for women. I think that's maybe some kind of like cultural, societal way of putting hierarchy and onto the human imagination in general. I know it's a little bit like peace out, but I think it's in all of us to be very emotional and creative and imaginative. And then I think the way that can be appreciated and expressed really depends on time and our culture and where we are also in our lives and the roles we play in society. And I think, I don't know, I mean, these films are obviously curated with the female, from a female point of view or a woman point of view, which I really appreciate because it is great to see this variety of expression. But I think, like, if we take that debate out, it doesn't out in the real world. It's maybe it doesn't. I mean, within the creative arts, it's much harder to distinguish between what is necessarily masculine and what's feminine, I think.
Yes. No, I agree, and I always love doing these programs to be able to show how women draw women as well, which is a whole other subject. But Ozzy's got a question. Give Ozzy a microphone.
Great job. Fantastic. Great film.
Microphone.
It's coming. It's coming. It's getting there. It's getting there.
Congratulations. It's a really wonderful films and brilliantly programmed. And I was really interested in Réka and Renee's instant kind of time warp, having to go back in the past and remember how they were feeling. And feeling is such a big thing in films. How do you emote? How do you get the audience to emote and connect with films? And as I was watching the films, sometimes I kept on feeling the screen is somehow restricting. It's flat, it's smaller than your worlds. Your worlds were really vibrant. They had this incredible character and personality, also sonically with the sound as well. And I wondered now, looking at it 4 years on, would you think about using other mediums to allow the audience to enter these worlds in a more interactive, more immersive way? Is that something you would consider or something that you would think about moving forward?
Who wants to go first?
Like games or VR or stuff like that. You mean kind of like a 360-degree situation? Anything else?
Renee is obviously started on opera, which is a completely different medium. So I'm not talking about games. It's whatever you think as an artist. What form would it take?
What would you like to do beyond the screen? The single screen.
I do stuff beyond the screen, like I paint and I do small sculptures and whatever, but it's more just for me to kind of cleanse my palette when I work on a movie, because I feel like if I start a movie again, like love. I worked on this film for more than a year, like 1.5 years, and you just get so into this universe, and you can't even draw any other characters anymore. I feel like it's just healthy to step out and maybe even step out of the computer and the 2D drawing animation and make stuff with analog. But I'm very much into cinema and movies, so I also am very much mainly inspired by live action, and I come from like a cinema in my films. That all of my boards are very like cinematic, I think, or that's what I aim for. So for me, that I don't feel like I really want to step more into these worlds than I already am.
So you have worked with a live orchestra before, haven't you?
Yeah, but that was, I mean, I'm not saying I don't do anything outside of this, but that was, I did like a 47-minute long piece that was orchestrated with like a 20 musician jazz orchestra, and it was amazing to see it, and it was a new experience in terms of making a live show and everything. But then that also came down to a short film in the end. I mean, the spine of that show, the spine of the animation is a 20-minute short. But yeah, it's always cool to try anything new, because it's gonna, I think, enrich your main thing that you're trying to work on, or at least in my case.
I think the reason I wanted to try stop motion was because of because I find sculpture, like a really interesting medium, and watching films like Eager by Alison Schulnick back years ago, like that for me is seeing, just kind of seeing sculptures moving on screen was something that I thought was very exciting and really, something that like really mesmerizing to see the handprints and to see kind of the process behind it. I think for me, like a medium or a new thing that I'd like to explore, maybe it's not so much different medium, or maybe it's more about like time. Like I guess I'd love to make a longer piece. I think I've mostly worked in shorts, and I think, I mean, the dream was always the dream, or something, a black hole is, or to make just a longer feature length, something that
Feature-length animation.
Yes,
You want to go there?
Yes, I mean very much so. I think it's a whole new thing, but I think having that time to explore would be exciting.
Anna, do you have anything you want to add? I mean, you do work in VR.
Well,
so.
I wanted to say two things. One, in terms of the music that you mentioned, which I did think was beautiful in everyone's, and Alec Kronecker, who made the music for The Linguist, is here, wonderful artist and musician. So I wanted to say thank you to Alec, because that was a very important part of the process, hearing his music and then responding to that with the editing. I'm really interested in that way of opening up the process through the music, collaboration. The Linguist was originally made for an exhibition. I'm a bit of an imposter because I'm not really an animator. I'm certainly not a filmmaker. I'm definitely an artist animator. So The Linguist was made for a gallery exhibition where it was shown in a kind of embedded in a plinth, and around it were lots of objects. So the kind of objects that are the kind of ritual objects, I call them, that are in the animation, were made at huge scale, so as if they were kind of like the leftovers of a colossus. So there's like a big mouth with the tongue, and then lots of severed fingers that were kind of put together. So the idea of that was to think about this idea of kind of ruin and these different times again. For me, it's very special to see it in a screening, because I didn't ever get to see it on a big screen, surrounded by beautiful work in a comfy chair. It was in a quite cold gallery. But that's definitely, I'm very interested in embedding animation as part of a practice with paintings and objects and I've done VR, but I'm not doing that again.
Oh,
That's a whole other story.
hear some more about that later. Yeah.
Yeah, buy me a wine and hear all about that.
Are we up to time? Yeah, okay. I'm sorry, if you have any more questions, you know what they look like. You may speak to them afterwards. So that just leaves me to say thank you all very much, and thank you for coming, and let's give them a round of applause.